in the heart of Silicon Valley, where neon lights and billion-dollar dreams intertwine. Connor Blake stood silent as a stone worn smooth by time. Once dubbed the Tech Prince, the founder of an app that transformed how the world connected, he had risen from a poor kid in the Boston suburbs to the pinnacle of fame. But now, at 35, he was no longer a prince. He was merely a shadow hiding in a cold, white mansion, where every corner echoed unspoken pain. That mansion, with its towering windows overlooking distant mountains, was not a home. It was more like a tomb, where Connor buried the shattered pieces of his heart. 3 years ago, his ex-wife Amelia's infidelity scandal had torn his life apart. She didn't just betray him. She aired it all to the media, turning him into a laughingstock for tabloids and venomous social media posts. Billionaire Cuckolded, the headline cut like a knife, slicing deep into his pride. In the following days, Connor sold his company for a 9-figure sum, cutting off all contact with friends, colleagues, and even himself. He locked his heart away, rejecting every call from the outside world, as if light would burn what little remained of him. Tonight, like countless nights before, Connor sat in the darkened living room, lit only by the lonely blue glow of an old laptop casting shadows on his weathered face. His deep blue eyes, once a weapon that captivated so many, were now clouded like a frozen lake in winter. He scrolled through old articles, their cold words retelling the story he longed to forget. Amelia Blake flaunts new lover, leaving billionaire husband in disgrace. He wondered, had he driven her away? Had his coldness, those long nights buried in work, pushed her into another's arms? But those questions never found answers. Only pain remained, like an old friend sitting quietly beside him each night. Outside, Silicon Valley pulsed with life. Expensive cars glided by, lavish parties echoed with laughter. But Connor no longer belonged to that world. He had chosen to cage himself in a glass prison where no one could touch him, and he could feel no one. Sometimes he wondered if his heart still beat, or if it had turned to stone like a silent rock deep beneath the sea, unnoticed by all. But fate, like a masterful playwright, always knows how to plant unexpected seeds. A thought flickered in Connor's mind in the stillness of the mansion. He couldn't keep living like this, a lost ghost. He needed to leave, to find a place where no one knew who he was, where he could breathe without feeling suffocated, a place to rediscover himself, or at least to forget. He closed the laptop, stood and looked around the room. The expensive paintings, the luxurious furniture, all meaningless. He wanted somewhere simple where he could be ordinary, not Connor Blake, a billionaire or a betrayed man. He tried to escape the spotlight, the cruel whispers of the world. And so, in a spur-of-the-moment decision, he searched online for a small, rundown apartment in the suburbs, a place no one would suspect where he could disappear. Connor's story was only beginning, and a faint light waited to touch him somewhere in the darkness. A light named Maya, a girl with a warm heart, and takeout boxes left at his door like whispers of hope. Would he dare open his heart to that light? Could a silent 452 stone melt to become human again? Dear friends, if Connor's story has touched your heart, please leave a like, a comment, or follow the channel to join me in exploring this emotional journey. Every bit of your support is a spark that warms this story, helping it spread and touch more hearts. Connor Blake's new apartment was tucked away in a dilapidated complex on the outskirts, where peeling walls and rusty staircases told tales of forgotten time. No dazzling neon lights, no sleek asphalt roads of Silicon Valley. Only the wind whistles through a cracked window, and a faint musty smell is in the air. The small apartment with its cramped living room, a kitchen corner stained with grease, and a single bed pushed against the window, was all Connor needed. He wanted this simplicity, wanted it to swallow the name Connor Blake, that once echoed far and wide, leaving behind a man without identity, without a past. On his first day, Connor stood in the middle of the room, holding an old suitcase, his eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling. He hadn't brought much simple clothes, a worn keyboard laptop, and a notebook he hadn't opened since Amelia left. He set the suitcase down, the faint thud sounding like a declaration. From now on, he would live a different life. No phone, no internet, no one knowing where he was. He had cut every tie to his old world, like a sailor casting anchor in the middle of the ocean, unsure of what shore awaited. But the silence Connor sought didn't come easily. That first night, as he lay on the hard bed, the sound of children's laughter from the neighboring apartment pierced through the thin walls sharp as a blade. That laughter, so pure and carefree, tightened his chest. He had never thought he'd notice such sounds. Children to him were a luxury, a dream stolen 15 years ago, when a car accident took not only his health, but his hope for a family. He turned over, pulling the blanket over his head, trying to block out the sounds. But they slipped through as if to remind him of what he could never have. On the second day, Connor began to settle into his new solitude. He didn't leave the apartment, only quietly brewing coffee in a chipped kettle, sitting by the window, watching people pass on the narrow street below. With their hurried steps and fleeting conversations, the neighbors seemed to belong to a world he no longer inhabited. He wondered if any of them had ever heard the name Connor Blake. Would anyone recognize the silent man in apartment 4B as the former centerpiece of headlines and interviews? But then he shook his head, chuckling at himself. Here he was, just a stranger. Strangely, that relieved him. The days that followed passed in a slow, almost monotonous rhythm. Connor spent most of his time reading old books he found in a corner of the room. Romance novels left behind, their pages yellowed with age. He read not out of love for the stories, but to fill the void. Yet every time the children's laughter from next door rang out, he paused, the book falling to his lap. That laughter, sometimes mixed with the soft hum of a woman's voice singing, irritated him. But it also stirred something strange. It wasn't curiosity, but rather like a gentle breeze slipping through the cracks of his frozen heart. One afternoon, as the sunset bathed the small street in gold, Connor heard light footsteps in the hallway. He paid no mind until a scent wafted through the door's gap, freshly baked bread, laced with a hint of rosemary. He stood, opened the door, and found a small plastic container at his doorstep. On it was a handwritten note, the script soft yet firm. Eat it. Don't waste my effort. No signature, no name, just a simple message that made Connor freeze for a few seconds. He looked around. The hallway was empty, save for the distant echo of children's voices from next door. He picked up the container, brought it inside, and opened it. A plate of toasted bread, a few slices of tomato, and some melted cheese. Simple but warm, like an embrace from a stranger. Connor ate each bite slowly that night, as if tasting something long lost. He didn't know who had left the food, but at that moment, for the first time in months, he felt he wasn't entirely alone. Someone quietly reached out to him somewhere in this rundown complex, even if he wasn't ready to take their hand. Part 3. The Invisible Encounter. The days in the rundown apartment flowed like a quiet river without ripples, but Connor Blake began to notice a new rhythm in his monotony. As the sunset slipped through the torn curtain every afternoon, he heard soft footsteps in the hallway. Those steps, gentle as falling petals, always paused at his door, leaving behind a small food container with a handwritten note. Eat it. Don't waste my effort. The unchanging message was a gentle reminder that somewhere out there, a stranger was quietly caring for him. Connor had never seen the person leaving these gifts, but he began to anticipate them, like awaiting a cool breeze in the stifling heat of summer. His apartment, still cluttered with unopened boxes and scattered old books, seemed less cold. Each container of food told a small story. One day it was a plate of pasta with tomato sauce, fragrant with fresh basil leaves. Another, a few crispy cookies, dotted with sweet chocolate chips. Sometimes it was just a simple bowl of steaming pumpkin soup, carrying the warmth of a real home. Though reluctant to admit it, Connor felt his heart stir faintly each time he opened a container. He ate each dish slowly, as if to prolong the moment when he sensed someone out there, however invisible. As Connor was brewing coffee one morning, he heard the usual sound of children's laughter from the neighboring apartment. But this time the laughter mingled with a gentle female voice telling a story about a rabbit and the moon. The voice was clear, with a warm undertone, like a soothing lullaby. Connor paused, coffee mug in hand, listening. He didn't know why, but that voice conjured an image of a smile, bright eyes, and an open heart. He wondered if the woman leaving the food containers was just on the other side of the thin wall. That day, Connor fell ill. A sudden fever hit, leaving his body weak and his mind foggy. Old memories of Amelia and past days flooded back like relentless waves. He closed his eyes, trying to push away the image of his ex-wife. But the pain clung to him, an unshakable shadow. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his haze. He dragged himself to open it, and there, like a minor miracle, was the familiar plastic container. Inside was a steaming bowl of chicken porridge, the faint scent of ginger tickling his nose. On top, the handwritten note in that soft, firm script. "Take your medicine. Don't make me worry." Beside it, a neatly placed strip of cold medicine. Connor stood there staring at the porridge, and for the first time he felt a warm surge in his chest. It wasn't the porridge or the medicine, but the unconditional care from someone he had never met. He brought the container inside, sat at the small kitchen table, and ate spoonful by spoonful slowly. The porridge was simple, but warm, like an embrace from an old friend. He looked at the note, his fingers brushing lightly over the handwriting. "Please don't make me worry." The simple words pierced through the ice in his heart like a tiny arrow. That night, as the fever subsided, Connor lay in bed, his gaze fixed on the window. He thought about the invisible neighbor, known only through food containers and handwritten notes. He wondered who she was, why she did this, and why his heart stirred each time he thought of her. He wasn't ready to seek answers, but deep down he knew those containers weren't just food. They were invisible threads pulling him closer to the world he had tried to escape. He placed the note on the table next to the others he had kept. They sat there like pieces of a puzzle he wasn't ready to face. But each night, as he opened a new container, the puzzle seemed to grow clearer, and he began to wonder if he would someday dare cross that thin wall to meet the person who had brought light into his life. The night sky was heavy, as if the world held its breath before the approaching storm. Dark clouds drifted across, obscuring the moonlight, and the old apartment complex where Connor Blake hid himself plunged into darkness as thunder roared. The power went out, leaving his small apartment in a silent black void, with only the howling rain outside the window. Connor sat in an old armchair, the light from the sole candle in the room, casting shadows on his weathered face, highlighting its harsh lines. He wasn't afraid of the dark, but this silence weighed on him, as if the night was digging deeper into old wounds. A knock sounded at the door, soft but hesitant, as if afraid to shatter the fragility of the moment. Connor looked up, his heart skipping a beat. He wasn't used to visitors, especially not on a night like this. He stood his steps slow, and when he opened the door, a small figure appeared under the dim hallway light. It was her, the girl he had imagined through handwritten notes and food containers. Maya. She stood there clutching a thin blanket, her large brown eyes reflecting a mix of worry and shyness. "Sorry, I'm afraid of the dark. Can I stay here for a bit?" Her voice trembled, but carried a warm tone like sunlight filtering through leaves. Connor froze, unsure how to respond. He nodded almost instinctively and stepped back to let her in. Maya crossed the threshold, bringing a faint scent of lavender soap and a hint of smoke from her candle. She glanced around the apartment, her eyes briefly widening at its simplicity, but she said nothing. Connor gestured toward the armchair, his voice hoarse. "Sit. I don't have much to offer." They sat across each other, separated by a small but awkward distance. The candle between them flickered like the faint heartbeat of the room. Maya clutched her blanket, her small hands intertwined as if seeking an anchor. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "I know it's weird to knock like this, but I can't stand the dark. It makes me remember things I shouldn't." She smiled, a sad but radiant smile, like the last light before night falls. Connor didn't know how to reply. He had never been good at conversation with a stranger, especially with someone like Maya, someone he only knew through food containers and notes. But tonight in the darkness, something urged him to open up. "I don't like the dark either," he said, his voice low. "But sometimes, it's the only place I feel safe." The words, like a confession, made Maya look up at him. Her eyes shimmered, as if wanting to ask more, but she only nodded slightly, as if understanding what he left unsaid. Their conversation began with small things. They talked about the storm, the creaky apartment complex, the sweltering summer days. But like water flowing through cracks in stone, the conversation deepened. Maya spoke of her work, caring for the neighborhood kids, and how they made her feel life was worth living. She said, "They make me laugh, even on my worst days." Her eyes lit up when she mentioned the children. Connor listened, and for the first time he genuinely desired to know more about someone. Hesitantly he asked, "Why do you leave food at my door?" Maya laughed, a playful yet shy smile. "Because you look like someone who needs taking care of," she replied. "I saw you through the window, always quiet like a shadow. Some food might make you feel less alone." Her words, simple but heartfelt, tightened Connor's chest. He wanted to say something but could only whisper, "Thank you." The night passed. The candles slowly burned out, but their conversation didn't stop. They spoke of broken dreams, of days they thought they'd never survive. Maya shared memories of a distant summer from her childhood, when sunlight seemed to linger forever. For the first time in years, Connor spoke of the dreams he once had, a family, a home, things he buried after the accident long ago. His voice grew heavy, but Maya didn't press. She just listened, her eyes gentle like an embrace. As the first light of dawn crept through the window, they realized they had talked all night. Maya yawned, her eyes tired, but still bright. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said, standing up. Connor looked at her, wanting to say something, but only managed a nod. When Maya left the apartment in silence again, he felt a strange emptiness, as if she had taken a piece of his darkness with her, leaving behind a small, fragile, persistent light. He sat down, his gaze falling on the burned-out candle. That night, for the first time, Connor felt his heart was no longer entirely stone. And deep down, he knew Maya was more than just a neighbor. She was a breeze, a light, and perhaps a new beginning he hadn't dared to dream of. The storm had passed, leaving the apartment complex in a damp stillness, as if the whole world was sighing after a long night. The faint light of dawn slipped through the torn curtain, casting pale golden streaks across the cold floor of Connor Blake's apartment. The candle in the middle of the room had burned out, leaving only a streak of white wax, like a memory of a sleepless night. Connor sat in the armchair, his gaze still fixed on the door, where Maya had just left. His heart flooded with a feeling he couldn't name, warm and disorienting, as if someone had touched his heart after a long slumber. Last night, as they sat across from each other, in the flickering candlelight, time seemed to stand still. Their conversation, from trivial questions to deep confessions, had drawn two strangers closer, like two lost stars brushing each other's orbits. Maya, with her gentle smile and eyes bright as a summer sky, had shared stories about the neighborhood kids, about the days she dreamed of becoming a storyteller for children. Connor, though hesitant, had opened up about his shattered dreams, the days he believed he could build a home until the accident and Amelia's betrayal took everything. As the first light of dawn peeked through, Maya had fallen asleep on Connor's old sofa. She curled up under the thin blanket, her curly hair loose, her breathing soft, like a lullaby. Connor sat there, not daring to move his eyes, quietly watching her. At that moment, he felt a strange warmth from the extinguished candle and Maya's presence. She thought a stranger who had just entered his life brought a sense of familiarity he had long forgotten. He wanted to reach out to touch that moment, but stopped, afraid that even a slight movement would shatter its fragility. But then a moment of closeness occurred, as if driven by an irrepressible instinct. As Maya stirred, her eyes still heavy with sleep, she accidentally brushed Connor's hand as they both reached for the slipping blanket. Their fingers intertwined for a second, long enough to make Connor's heart pound, as if awakened from a long sleep. Maya flinched, her brown eyes wide, shimmering with embarrassment and surprise. "Sorry," she whispered, her voice soft as a passing breeze. But Connor only shook his head, saying nothing, because he didn't understand the feeling swelling within him. They fell silent, the space between them charged with an invisible electricity. Maya stood adjusting her blanket and said softly, "I should go. Thank you for last night." She smiled, both gentle and wary, as if she sensed something had shifted. Connor only nodded, his throat tight, unable to speak. When the door closed behind Maya, the apartment returned to its familiar silence, but Connor knew it was no longer the same. A small piece of his heart had been stolen, or perhaps awakened. He walked to the window, looking at the narrow street glistening with early sunlight. Maya's image, her smile, her gentle voice kept replaying in his mind like a melody he couldn't shake. He thought of the moment their hands touched, of the warmth from her small fingers. It wasn't love. At least he told himself that, but something more profound, like an invisible thread pulling him out of the darkness he had locked himself in. Connor sat down unconsciously, touching the sofa where Maya had slept. He felt a strange emptiness, but also a tiny spark of hope. He didn't know who Maya was, didn't know why she had stepped into his life, but he knew that something had begun last night in this rundown apartment. Something he wasn't ready to name but couldn't deny. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of that moment spread through him, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. After that blackout night, Connor Blake's apartment seemed to carry a different breath, as if the light from Maya's smile had slipped into every corner, if only fleetingly. But his heart, long accustomed to solitude, withdrew into a new shell of fear and guilt. The brief burning moment when their hands touched haunted him like an ungraspable dream. He wanted to hold on to that feeling, but every time he thought of Maya, old scars throbbed, reminding him of what he had lost and what he could never have. Connor began avoiding Maya. He no longer stood by the window to watch the hallway and opened the door at the sound of her familiar footsteps. The food containers still appeared at his doorstep, but no longer came with handwritten notes. Only silence remained, like a gentle reproach from his invisible neighbor. Each time he saw a plastic container neatly placed at his threshold, a pang of pain shot through his chest. He wanted to knock on the apartment next door, say thank you, and ask why she persisted with a stranger like him. But he stopped himself, imprisoned by the ghosts in his mind. He told himself he wasn't worthy, not of Maya's care, her gentle gaze, or the warmth of the meals she left. He, a man carrying unhealed wounds, a man stripped by fate of the ability to build a family. How could he let himself fall into a vague, nameless emotion? He feared that if he let Maya get closer, he would hurt her as Amelia had hurt him. Or worse, he would fail again, unable to bring happiness to anyone. Days passed, and Connor sank into self-imposed silence. He spent hours at the kitchen table, staring at the growing pile of food containers in the corner, each a reminder of Maya's existence. One afternoon, as a light rain blurred the window, he stumbled across an old article on his worn keyboard laptop. It was a local piece about a young black woman who had started a small class for neighborhood kids. Her name was Maya Carter. The article described how she cared for orphaned children, turning their bleak days into bright moments. But what stunned Connor was a small detail. At the end, Maya had lost her entire family in a car accident as a teenager. She grew up in solitude, but she brought light to others instead of letting pain consume her. Connor read the article repeatedly, his eyes lingering on Maya's faded photo. She stood among the children, her smile radiant like sunlight, but her eyes held a deep sadness. He realized Maya wasn't just a kind neighbor. She was a soul that had been shattered, yet rose again choosing to love despite life's harshness. That truth made Connor feel small. With all he had achieved, he had let himself drown in darkness, while Maya, with losses no less profound, still found ways to warm the world. That night, as the rain pattered outside the window, Connor opened a new food container. Inside was a simple sandwich, carefully made. He ate each bite, but the taste was bitter in his throat. He thought of Maya, of the times she stood at his door quietly leaving these gifts. She didn't need him to reciprocate, didn't need his thanks, yet she continued as if believing that one day he would open his heart. Connor stood and walked to the door, his hand touching the knob, but pausing. He wanted to knock on the apartment next door, to look into Maya's warm brown eyes, and say he had seen her not just through the food, but through her heart. But he lacked the courage. He returned to his chair, sitting in the dark, letting silence envelop him. This time, though, the silence wasn't as cold. It carried a small spark of light, a promise that though he wasn't ready, Maya was there just beyond the thin wall waiting for him to find himself again. The rain had stopped, but the air in the apartment complex remained heavy, as if the droplets clinging to the windows whispered untold stories. In his small apartment, Connor Blake continued his self-imposed silence, but his heart was no longer at peace. Maya's food containers still appeared regularly at his door, but the absence of her handwritten notes left an invisible void. He wanted to see her, to say something to break the wall he had built. Still, every time he thought of Maya's warm brown eyes, he was pulled back to painful memories of Amelia, the accident, and the infertility diagnosis that felt like an unappealing sentence. One afternoon, a rapid, unfamiliar knock echoed at the door, as the sunlight faded over the narrow street. Connor looked up, his heart quickening. He opened the door, and there stood Maya, but not the Maya of gentle smiles or twinkling eyes from the blackout night. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly, as if to stop them from trembling. Her brown eyes, usually bright as stars, were now clouded, veiled by an inner storm. "Connor," she said, her voice small but trembling, "I need to talk to you." He stepped back, inviting her in, but the air between them grew stifling. Maya didn't sit. She stood near the door, her gaze flickering to the floor, as if searching for a way to voice difficult words. Connor sensed the tension, a bad feeling rising in his chest. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low, trying to mask his unease. Maya took a deep breath. Her lips pressed tight before she spoke each word drawn from a deep place in her heart. "I'm pregnant." Soft but sharp words, were like a stone dropping into a still lake, shattering everything in Connor's mind. He froze, his eyes vacant as if the world had stopped turning. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice breaking. "That can't happen." Maya looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, but she held her resolve. "I went to the doctor. It's confirmed. And I know you're the father." Her words cut through Connor's rationality like a knife. He shook his head, stepping back, gripping the table's edge for balance. "No, Maya, you're mistaken. I can't. I'm infertile. The doctors made that clear 15 years ago. Are you sure?" The air in the room grew so heavy, it was palpable. Maya's hands tightened, her voice sharper now, laced with hurt. "You think I'm lying? I'm not that kind of person. I know what happened between us that night, and I know what I'm saying." She stepped forward, her eyes searching his, seeking a glimmer of hope, a sign he would believe her. But Connor, trapped by his past, saw only darkness. "You don't understand," he said, his voice now a desperate whisper. "I can't have children. The doctors tested me not just once. That's why Amelia left me, because I couldn't give her a family. You must be mistaken." His words, though unintended, were sharp as an arrow piercing Maya's heart. She stood still, her eyes wide, tears silently falling. "So you don't believe me?" she said, her voice breaking. "I thought you were different, Connor. I thought you'd understand." The tension erupted into an argument, not loud, but deeply painful. Connor swept up in a whirlwind of doubt, and old wounds said words he knew he'd regret. "How can I know? How can I believe it's mine? I can't, Maya. I can't." Maya stepped back, as if his words had struck her down. She didn't respond. She only shook her head, her lips pressed tight to stifle a sob. She said, "I didn't come here to beg you to believe me." Her voice was trembling but resolute. "I just thought you deserved to know. But if you choose not to believe, that's your choice." She turned and left the apartment, leaving Connor in suffocating silence. He stood there, his hands still gripping the table, his heart pounding as if it would burst from his chest. He wanted to run after her, to say he didn't mean to hurt her, but his feet felt nailed to the floor. Memories of Amelia, of her mocking his dreams of a family, flooded back like a wave, drowning the light Maya had brought. He couldn't believe in miracles, couldn't think he could be a father, couldn't believe fate would grant him a chance he had long deemed impossible. That night, Connor sat in the dark, his gaze empty as he stared out the window. The rain had stopped, but the storm in his heart raged on. He thought of Maya, the tears on her cheeks, and how she stood there, resilient yet fragile. He wondered if he was missing something greater than his wounds. Was there a miracle, however minor, waiting for him to seize? But in that moment, he could only sink into doubt, letting the darkness swallow the last flicker of light Maya had left behind. The apartment, once Connor Blake's sanctuary from the world, had become a prison, where the sharp words exchanged with Maya echoed. After their painful argument, the air in the room felt thick, every wall seemingly steeped in regret and doubt. Connor stood frozen before the door where Maya had just left, his eyes empty, as if his soul had followed her out. Her words, "I'm pregnant," replayed in his mind, a dissonant melody that stirred both hope and deep-seated pain. But he couldn't face it. He couldn't face her himself, or the possibility that the impossible had happened. That night, Connor didn't sleep. He sat in the armchair, a half-empty bottle of liquor on the table, the street lamp's glow casting harsh lines across his face. He thought of Maya, her wounded brown eyes, the way she stood there, resilient yet fragile, defending what she believed was true. But like a wave, old memories crashed in the doctor's stern gaze, the infertility diagnosis, like a verdict, and Amelia's cold smile as she left him. "I can't live with someone who can't give me a family," she had said. And those words now cut into his heart like a blade, making him doubt the miracle Maya offered. Connor made a snap decision the next morning, like a weary traveler fleeing a storm. He couldn't stay here, face Maya, her food containers that still appeared silently, or the look in her eyes that might hold disappointment or pity. He packed a few clothes into his old suitcase and left the apartment without a goodbye. He didn't look back, afraid a glance would make him reconsider. He drove to a cheap motel on the outskirts where no one knew him, where he could keep running, not just from Maya, but from himself. The motel was bleak, with stained walls and the stale smell of cigarette smoke clinging to the curtains. Connor sat on the hard bed, another bottle in hand, his gaze lost in the void. His mind drifted to the days after the accident, when the doctor told him his chances of fatherhood were nearly zero. 1 in a million, the doctor had said, voice flat, as if reading a report. Connor had accepted it, learned to live with it. But now, with Maya's claim of pregnancy, those words became a haunting question. Could a miracle truly exist? Or was this a mistake, a cruel trick of fate? The days that followed saw Connor living like a ghost. He avoided light-crowded streets and the phone ringing from old friends trying to reach him. He drowned in liquor, painful memories, and self-blame. He thought of Maya, how he pushed her away, and the harsh words he spoke in panic. "How can I know? How can I believe it's mine?" Those words now echoed like a curse. He wondered if he was hurting someone who didn't deserve it. Was he missing a chance to heal love and believe in something greater than himself? As rain fell again, Connor sat by the motel window one night, watching droplets slide down the glass. He thought of Maya's food containers, her smile during the blackout, how she brought light to his life without asking for anything. He recalled the old article, her story, a girl who lost her family, but chose to love to bring joy to others. And then he thought of himself, a man who once had everything, but let pain define his life. In that moment, a small spark flickered in the darkness of his soul. He didn't know if Maya's words were actual, and he didn't know if he could believe in miracles. But he knew he couldn't keep running, couldn't let fear and the past imprison him forever. He set the bottle down, his gaze fixed on the distance where the old apartment complex waited. Maya was still there, and though he wasn't ready to face her, he knew he had to return, not just for answers, but to find himself, to reclaim the light Maya had kindled within him. The cheap motel where Connor Blake sought refuge felt like a cold iron cage, trapping him in a whirlwind of chaotic thoughts and sleepless nights. Every sound in the hallway, every gust of wind through the rickety window, made him startle, as if waiting for a sign from fate. But the only sign he received was the echo of Maya's voice in his mind. "I'm pregnant." A small flame that warmed and burned him. He had fled, leaving her in pain. But now, in this dim room, he knew he could no longer avoid her, the truth, or himself. One early morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the curtains, Connor looked in the mirror, facing a man he barely recognized. His once proud, deep blue eyes were now weary, etched with the marks of solitude. He thought of Maya, her expression as she left his apartment, and the food containers that still appeared despite his unworthiness. She had given him light, and he had repaid her with doubt. Guilt weighed on his chest like a heavy stone. He knew that to reclaim that light, he had to confront the past, the wounds he had tried to bury for 15 years. Connor sought out the old hospital where he had received his infertility diagnosis like a curse. Dr. Harris, who had delivered the verdict years ago, was older now, his hair white, but his eyes still sharp and empathetic. In the small examination room, with the faint smell of antiseptic, Connor sat across from him, his voice hesitant but resolute. "Doctor, I need the truth. Is there any chance, even the smallest, that I could have a child?" He recounted Maya's story, her words the blackout night, and the doubt that had driven him to push her away. His voice broke each word like a self-inflicted wound. "Doctor." Harris sat quietly, momentarily flipping through Connor's old yellowed medical file. He sighed, his gaze thoughtful. "Connor, I remember your case clearly. Back then, I said your chances of having a child were almost non-existent. But," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "medicine isn't always absolute. There's a chance, however small, 1 in a million perhaps, that you could still create a miracle. It's not impossible, just scarce." He looked at Connor, his eyes seeming to spark a glimmer of hope. "If that girl is telling the truth, then maybe you're the 1 in a million." The doctor's words were like a breeze clearing the fog in Connor's mind. 1 in a million. It was a small number that barely existed, yet enough to stir his heart. He thought of Maya, how she stood before him, resolute yet hurt, of the food containers of her smile during the blackout. Could it be that fate had chosen him to defy its own rules? Could he truly be the father of the child? Maya carried. Leaving the hospital, Connor walked down a sunlit street, but a storm still raged within him. He thought of the years gone by, how he had let pain define him, how he had fled from Maya out of fear. But now, Dr. Harris's words were a beacon illuminating the path he had willfully ignored. He no longer wanted to run. He tried to return look into Maya's eyes and ask her again, not with doubt, but sincerity. He wanted to believe that a miracle had occurred, even if it was just a 1 in a million chance. On the ride back to the apartment complex, Connor gazed out the window, trees blurring past like fragments of memory. He thought of Maya, of how she had brought light to his life, despite receiving nothing but silence in return. He thought of the food containers, the handwritten notes, her gentle voice telling stories to the children. He knew he had been wrong, letting fear and the past obscure the most precious thing standing before him. Though unsure if he could mend the hurt he had caused, he knew he had to try, not just for Maya, not just for the child, but for himself, for the man he wanted to become. As the car stopped in front of the complex, Connor took a deep breath, his heart pounding. He didn't know how Maya would react, didn't know if she'd even want to see him. But this time, he wouldn't run. He would cross the threshold, not to seek answers, but to reclaim the light Maya had kindled, and perhaps to ignite a new spark in his heart. The street leading to the old apartment complex appeared before Connor Blake like a familiar yet strange painting. The rustling trees, the walls dappled with afternoon sunlight, and the distant sound of children's laughter reminded him of the days he had tried to escape. The old suitcase in his hand felt heavy, not with clothes, but with suppressed emotions. Regret, hope, and a flicker of newfound courage. After days wandering in a cheap motel, after endless nights facing the darkness within, Connor knew he could no longer live as a shadow. He had to return, not just to find Maya, but to find himself. Stepping into the complex's hallway, the familiar musty smell hit him, but it didn't bother him this time. He paused before his apartment door, his gaze instinctively drifting to the door next to it. Maya's. He imagined her standing there with her gentle smile and warm brown eyes, but the memory of their last encounter tightened his chest. Her eyes filled with hurt after his doubts cut into his mind like a knife. He took a deep breath, his hand clenching the doorknob, telling himself that whether she forgave him, he owed her an apology. But Maya wasn't home. Connor stood before her door, knocking softly a few times, but only silence answered. He returned to his apartment, opened the door, and was surprised to find a small food container at the threshold, a reminder that Maya hadn't given up on him, even after he pushed her away. Inside was a plate of butter-scented cookies, but no handwritten note. The absence of her soft, scripted words left a void, as if he had lost the most precious thing. That afternoon, as the sunset bathed the street in gold, Connor heard children's laughter from the complex's backyard. He stepped onto his small balcony and saw Maya. She sat on an old wooden chair surrounded by kids, each holding a colorful balloon. Maya was telling a story, her voice clear and sparkling, like sunlight captivating the children. But Connor noticed something different. Her eyes, though still bright, held a trace of sadness, as if hiding a wound no one could see. He stood silently watching her from afar, his heart pounding. He wanted to approach, but his feet felt rooted. Then, as if by a miracle, Maya looked up, her eyes meeting his. Time seemed to freeze. Her brown eyes flickered with light for a moment, but quickly turned cold, like an invisible wall rising between them. She stood, said something to the kids, and left Connor empty. That evening, Connor gathered his courage and knocked on Maya's door. When she opened it, she was still wearing an oversized sweater, her arms wrapped around herself, as if shielding her fragility. "Maya," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong not to believe you." The words, though clumsy, were the most sincere he could muster. Maya looked at him, her gaze cold but not emotionless. "You think an apology is enough, Connor?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. "I don't need you to believe me. I just wanted you to respect the truth." Connor lowered his head, guilt crashing over him like a wave. "I saw the doctor," he said, his voice soft but firm. "He said there's a slight chance I could have a child. I didn't dare believe it, but I want to. I want to feel you, Maya." He looked up, his eyes searching hers, seeking a spark to cling to. Maya stayed silent, her lips pressed tight, but her gaze softened, as if the wall between them was cracking. "I'm not promising I'll forgive you right away," she said, her voice gentler. "But if you want, you can start by proving you're not someone who only knows how to run." She closed the door gently but firmly, leaving Connor in the hallway, his heart aching yet flickering with hope. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt he had a reason to keep going. Not just for Maya, not just for the child, but for himself, the man who once thought he'd lost everything, but was now learning to believe in miracles. The early autumn sunlight filtered through sparse trees, casting gentle patches of light across the old apartment complex. Connor Blake's apartment, though still simple, no longer felt as cold. Maya's food containers continued to appear at his door less frequently than before, but each one carried an invisible thread slowly reconnecting them. After his clumsy apology that night, Maya didn't open up immediately, but her eyes, though still guarded, had softened from their earlier coldness. She gave him a chance not to fix the past, but to prove he could be dependable. Connor started with the smallest gestures. One morning, noticing Maya's apartment window was stuck, he brought over his old toolbox and quietly fixed it, while she was busy with the kids. He said little, leaving only a small note. "Windows fixed. Thanks for still leaving food for me." Maya didn't respond immediately, but a heart-shaped cookie appeared in the food container at his door the next day. No note was attached yet. It was enough to stir his heart. That was how they communicated, not through grand words, but simple actions like small stones paving a long path. While cleaning his apartment one day, Connor heard Maya coughing through the thin wall. Concerned, he knocked on her door, and when she opened it, her face was pale, her eyes tired. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of care. Maya smiled weakly, waving it off, "Just a slight cold. The kids keep me too busy." But Connor wouldn't let her brush it off. He returned to his kitchen, preparing a simple bowl of chicken porridge, the only dish he knew how to make from his days living with his mother. When he brought it over, he saw Maya on her sofa, wrapped in a thin blanket, her eyes surprised at the sight of the porridge. He said, "My turn to take care of you." His voice was soft but sincere. From then on, Connor became a steadier presence in Maya's life. He drove her to prenatal checkups, standing silently outside the clinic, his heart racing at the thought of the baby, a miracle he still didn't fully dare to believe. He fixed an old stroller for the neighborhood kids, helped Maya tidy her small apartment, and sometimes sat with her listening to stories about the children she cared for. Those moments, though small, were like drops of water soaking into parched earth, softening his once stone heart. One evening, under a moon hanging softly in the sky, Maya invited Connor into her apartment. The small space was warm, filled with children's drawings and scattered toys. They sat at the kitchen table, 2 cups of steaming tea before them. Maya opened up about her past for the first time in days. She spoke of the accident that took her family, the nights she cried alone, and her dream of opening a daycare so no child would feel the loneliness she had. "I want them to know there's always a place to return to," she said, her eyes bright, but tinged with sadness. Connor listened, his heart tightening. Despite her deep scars, he realized that Maya chose to love and bring light to others. He looked at her and spoke of himself for the first time. Not the billionaire Connor Blake, but the boy who dreamed of a home, who believed love could transcend all limits. He shared about the accident, Amelia, and the years he let pain define him. "I thought I didn't deserve happiness," he said, his voice low, "but meeting you made me want to believe I could try again." Maya looked at him, her gaze gentle but not rushed. "Happiness isn't something you have to earn, Connor. It's something you choose." Her simple yet profound words were like a breeze through his soul, carrying hope and a touch of fear. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that the baby in Maya's womb was a miracle they were both still learning to embrace. But in that moment, sitting with her under the moonlight, he felt a connection he never thought he'd find. As he left Maya's apartment, walking through the dim hallway, his heart was no longer heavy. He thought of the days to come, the baby and Maya's dreams. He wanted to be part of it, not just out of duty, but because for the first time, he truly wanted to live not for the past, but for the future, for Maya and his own thawing heart. The gentle autumn sunlight draped over the old apartment complex like a delicate veil, softening the cracks of time. In Connor Blake's small apartment, the space was no longer as stark as before. A few children's drawings brought over by Maya hung clumsily on the walls, like pieces of a new life. Though still marked by fragile gaps, the relationship between him and Maya was slowly mending through moments of sincerity. The times they fixed strollers for the kids, the evenings spent with steaming tea, and the quiet glances exchanged filled with hope and fear. But today the air was heavier than ever in the hospital's examination room. Connor sat beside Maya, his hands gripping the chair palms slick with sweat. They were here for the DNA test results, the final step to confirm what they both struggled to believe, that the baby in Maya's womb, or rather, babies, were his. When the doctor entered, holding a thin white envelope, Connor's heart seemed to stop. Though trying to stay calm, Maya couldn't hide the tension in her deep brown eyes. She took his hand gently but firmly, as if to say that whatever the outcome, they would face it together. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, smiled slightly before opening the envelope. "Congratulations to you both," she said, her voice steady but carrying a strange weight. "The DNA test confirms that Connor is the father of the babies." She paused, her smile widening. "And as we learned from the previous ultrasound, Maya is carrying 7 children, a sporadic case, a true miracle." The words were like a gust of wind sweeping away all doubt and fear in Connor's heart. He turned to Maya, his eyes blank momentarily as if unable to grasp what he had just heard. 7 children. The 1 in a million chance Dr. Harris had mentioned was no longer just a possibility. It was real, alive in every beat of Maya's heart. He wanted to speak, but his throat tightened, and only a silent tear rolled down his weathered cheek. Maya, though equally stunned, smiled a trembling, joyful smile. "See, Connor," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "We've done the impossible." She placed her hand on her belly, where 7 tiny lives were growing, and in that moment, Connor felt his heart melt, like the last piece of ice surrendering to sunlight. He gripped her hand, their fingers intertwining, and for the first time he felt no fear, only joy, fragile but radiant like moonlight piercing the night. On the drive back they sat in silence, but it wasn't stifling. Connor drove occasionally, glancing at Maya, who looked out the window, her hands still resting on her belly, as if protecting those tiny miracles. He thought of their journey from anonymous food containers, the blackout night, the arguments, and the mending. Despite her scars, he thought of how Maya chose to trust and love. And now, she had given him a gift. He never dared dream of a family. The sunset bathed the street in gold as they returned to the complex. Maya paused at her apartment door, turning to Connor, her eyes shimmering. "Are you scared?" she asked, her voice soft as a breeze. Connor smiled, and for the first time in years, the smile held no trace of strain. "Yes," he replied, "but I want to face it this time. With you, with the kids." Maya said nothing, only nodded, but her smile was like a promise. No matter how tough the road ahead, they wouldn't walk it alone. Connor lay in bed that night, his gaze fixed on the window where the moonlight gleamed. He thought of the 7 children of Maya, of the miracle he once thought impossible. He was no longer the man fleeing his past. He was a father, a friend, and perhaps one day, someone Maya could rely on. In the darkness, his heart was no longer stone. It beat vigorously, full of life, ready for what lay ahead. The gentle autumn sunlight filtered through sparse trees, casting shimmering patches of light across the old apartment complex, as if soothing time's cracks. Connor Blake's small apartment, once a solitary refuge, now brimmed with warmth. Children's drawings hung haphazardly on the walls. Small toys Maya brought over were scattered on shelves, and cookies wafted from the kitchen, all pieces of a budding family portrait. After the DNA test confirmed the impossible miracle, Connor and Maya embarked on a new journey, where each day was a challenge, but also a promise of the future. Connor moved in with Maya in her small apartment, turning the cramped space into a home. Maya's apartment, with its faded floral curtains and tiny kitchen table, became the place where they faced new pressures together. 7 children, a miracle they were still learning to embrace, brought joy, but also worry. In the mornings, Connor woke early, brewing coffee for Maya, carefully placing a cup beside her as she stirred. In the afternoons, he sat with her, listening to her talk about backaches and exhaustion. Yet her eyes always lit up when she spoke of the children to come. "There'll be a whole soccer team," she joked, her smile radiant as sunlight. And Connor could only hold her hand silently, grateful she hadn't given up on him. He began investing in Maya's dream, a daycare center, to bring joy and safety to the neighborhood's children. Drawing on his experience building a billion-dollar company, Connor quietly contacted old friends seeking funding and legal support. He hasn't told Maya yet, wanting to surprise her. As she slept soundly in the evenings, he sat at the kitchen table sketching plans for the center, envisioning a colorful place where kids could laugh and play, and where Maya could realize her dream. He thought of their 7 children, and how they'd grow up in the world Maya built, and his once stone heart felt strangely warm. But the journey wasn't all sunshine. Carrying 7 children took a toll on Maya, leaving her more exhausted daily. Some nights she stayed awake in pain, and Connor, though clumsy, was always there rubbing her back, telling silly stories to make her laugh. He said, "I thought I was only good at coding." His voice was warm, but now I'm learning to be a father. Maya looked at him, her gaze gentle but sharp. "You're doing well, Connor," she whispered, and those simple words blew away his lingering doubts like a breeze. They prepared for the children together. Connor painted the apartment, turning a corner into a space for tiny cribs. Maya, with her meticulous care, knitted small woolen hats, each a different color, as if giving each child a unique mark. They playfully argued about names, how to care for 7 babies at once, and sometimes sat together in silence, hands clasped, feeling each other's presence. Those quiet moments, though simple, were precious gems sparkling in Connor's heart. One afternoon, as the sunset bathed the complex in gold, Connor led Maya to the backyard where the neighborhood kids were playing. He pointed to an old building nearby, which he had secretly bought to start building the daycare. "This is for you," he said, his voice trembling, "for your dream and our kids." Maya froze, her brown eyes wide, tears silently falling. She hugged him, saying nothing, but the embrace spoke volumes, gratitude, love, and a belief they could face any challenge together. That night, lying beside Maya in the small apartment, Connor listened to her steady breathing, feeling the warmth of her body. He thought of the 7 children and the daycare, a future he once thought impossible. He was no longer the man fleeing his past. He was a father, a partner, and perhaps one day, Maya's soulmate. In the darkness, he placed his hand on her belly, feeling the tiny movements of their children, and for the first time, he felt no fear. Only love, fragile but fierce, ready to embrace whatever the future held. The sky roared with fury that night, as if testing the miracle Connor Blake and Maya Carter had built together. Fierce winds howled outside the window, and rain poured as if to drown the old apartment complex. In their small apartment, flickering lights cast shadows on Maya's pale, exhausted face. 8 months pregnant, she was struck by unexpected labor pains, earlier than anticipated, thrusting them into a whirlwind of worry and hope. Connor, hands trembling, gripped Maya's tightly, his eyes never leaving her, as if trying to pour all his strength into her. "Maya, are you okay?" he asked, voice hoarse, masking his panic. Despite her pain, Maya offered a faint smile, her hand squeezing his. "It's just, the kids want to come early," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. Connor didn't dare let go, hurriedly calling an ambulance, his heart pounding as if it might burst. He thought of their 7 children, the miracle they had embraced, and the fear that it could disappear again. The ride to the hospital was a tense journey. Rain blurred the windows, but Connor saw only Maya. Her face was radiant with a beauty he couldn't look away from, despite the pain. He held her hand, whispering words of comfort, though he battled his fears. "I'm here, Maya," he said. "I'll always be here." And for the first time, he felt the weight of that promise. Maya nodded, her deep brown eyes locking onto his, as if seeking an anchor in the storm. At the hospital, everything unfolded like a frantic dream. Nurses and doctors moved swiftly, their voices clear yet distant. Maya was wheeled into the delivery room, and Connor, though asked to wait outside, insisted on staying by her side. He held her hand, feeling each contraction shake her, and in that moment, he was no longer the man who fled from pain. He was a father and a partner, ready to face anything for Maya and their children. The hours of labor stretched like a century. With all her strength, Maya fought through each wave of pain, her voice faint but unyielding. Connor stayed by her side, wiping sweat from her brow, whispering encouragements, sharing silly stories about the days they'd raised their children. We'll take them to the beach, Maya. I'll teach them to swim, and you'll tell them bedtime stories every night," he said, his voice trembling but hopeful. Maya, exhausted, smiled, her eyes shimmering, as if she believed in that future. Then the true miracle arrived. The first baby's cry was clear and strong, like a melody breaking the room's silence. Then the second, the third, and so on, until 7 tiny lives entered the world, each cry a note in a symphony of life. The doctors, accustomed to deliveries, couldn't hide their awe and emotion at this rare case. Connor stood, frozen tears streaming down his cheeks as he looked at their children. 7 tiny, healthy angels nestled in small cribs. Maya, though exhausted, held Connor's hand, her eyes gleaming like moonlight. "Can we name them after my family?" she whispered. Connor nodded, speechless, as she called each child: Anna, James, Lily, Thomas, Rose, Michael, and Grace, names carrying the memory of the family Maya had lost, now reborn in these new lives. Connor looked at the babies, at Maya, and felt his heart expand, holding a love he never thought possible. As they left the delivery room, Connor sat beside Maya, now asleep from exhaustion. He gazed at her, their tiny children, and thought of their journey from anonymous food containers, the blackout night, the fights, and the healing. He thought of the 1-in-a-million miracle, how Maya had pulled him from darkness, and how they had built a family together. In the hospital's soft light, Connor leaned down gently, kissing Maya's forehead, and whispered, "Thank you for everything." From this moment on, he knew his life was no longer his alone. It belonged to Maya, to their 7 children, and to a love that had transcended all limits. The once dilapidated apartment complex wore a new coat of life the following autumn. Its peeling walls were freshly painted, small flower beds bloomed in the courtyard, and children's laughter echoed through the street. At the heart of the neighborhood stood a small building named the House of Light, adorned with vibrant murals painted by the local kids. This was the daycare center Maya Carter had dreamed of, built by her and Connor Blake. Through their challenging days, transforming past scars into smiles for the future. Their new home, not far from the daycare, was a haven filled with love. The walls were covered with photos of their 7 little angels: Anna, James, Lily, Thomas, Rose, Michael, and Grace, each with a mischievous spark, but all bearing Maya's deep brown eyes. The house was alive with laughter, cries, and babies babbling like a never-ending melody. Once a solitary man in a cold mansion, Connor was now a clumsy but devoted father. He learned to change diapers, mix formula, and tell silly stories the kids loved, even if they often giggled at his awkwardness. Maya, with a heart as vast as the sky, was the soul of the home. She ran the daycare with all her passion, caring for their 7 children and others in the neighborhood. As the sunset bathed the street in gold each afternoon, she sat by the window, watching the kids play, feeling a simple happiness she once thought unattainable. Connor often stood behind her, his arms around her, and in those moments, they both knew they had found the most precious thing, a family. One evening, with the kids asleep, Connor hosted a small party in the daycare's backyard. Colorful balloons, floated lanterns glowed under the moonlight, and soft music blended with the laughter of neighborhood children. Connor stood in the center, holding a glass of juice, his eyes shining as he watched Maya cradle Grace, their youngest. He cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention, and spoke, his voice warm with emotion. "I once thought my life was over, that I didn't deserve happiness. But then Maya came with her food containers, smile, and these 7 little miracles. She changed me, gave me a reason to live, to love. Thank you, Maya, for not giving up on me." Maya looked at him, her brown eyes glistening with tears, but her smile was radiant as sunlight. She said nothing, stepped forward, placed Grace in his arms, and rested her head on his shoulder. The crowd clapped, but amid the noise, they heard only the beating of each other's hearts. Connor leaned down, kissing her forehead, and whispered, "I'll spend my life making you happy." Maya smiled her eyes, saying she was already pleased from the moment they chose to be together. That night, under a high-hanging moon, Connor and Maya sat together on a bench, watching their children sleep in their small cribs. They thought of their journey from lonely days, the blackout night, the fights and reconciliations, to the moment their 7 children were born. They thought of the one-in-a-million miracle, how fate had brought them together, and how love had transcended all limits. Connor held Maya's hand, feeling the warmth of her fingers, knowing that they would always have each other, no matter what challenges life brought. Their home was more than a shelter in the gentle moonlight, a world of love where scars became stories and dreams became reality. Connor looked at Maya, at their 7 children, and smiled. He had found home not in lavish mansions, but in the hearts of those he loved. Dear friends, Connor and Maya's story has come to a close, but its message of love and hope lives on. If their journey touched you, please leave a like, share your thoughts in a comment, or follow for more beautiful stories. Your support is the breeze that fuels dreams like Maya and Connor's.